Okay, welcome to the monthly community call, Identity Global, the first one. As you know, it's a non-partisan, non-product pushing, non-agendaed community call. It is what it says on the tin. I'm the CEO of Identity Experts, and that's the last time you'll hear me punting our company name around. Jason Banks is hosting this month's call. And just a quick thank you to Joe Stevenson for creating this with Jason and making it. So, Jason, can you just move us on to the next slide, please? So, holding these monthly. The next one will be on the 21st of May. So you can put that in your calendars if you so wish. We've chosen the webinar format to keep things informative and flowing. Feel free to drop a question, any question you have in the Q&A box, and use the chat box within the webinar to get involved. After the call, we'll be sending out May's registrations link, a link to the recording, and a speaker volunteering form for those who want to get involved in the next ones. Okay, so this month's agenda is obviously the welcome from myself. We then had a guest speaking spot from Amin Nabil, who was going to do a part on securing the move to the cloud. Q&A, Jason Banks is going to do a slot on the future of identity. There's a Q&A and then a concluding element. So introducing our next speaker is Ahmed Nabil. Is Nabil on the call? Has he managed to join us okay?
No, I'm afraid he's not managed to join us just yet.
Okay. I think the easiest thing to do then, Jason, so we go straight to your slot and either Ahmed will catch up or we'll punt round to him next time.
No, fingers crossed. Okay, I'll switch on from that. Okay, so this is a semi-speculative talk on the future of identity. We live in exciting times, and it seems to have always been that way, and it seems to get a lot more interesting as things move on. So what I'm very quickly going to talk about is where we came from, roughly where we are now, where we headed next, and then peek over the horizon as to one of the things I think is going to come along and disrupt all the things that we know and love. One thing I would ask to bear in mind is keep in mind with a lot of the things we're talking about, there's an 80-20 rule at play. 80% of the people that we interact with will be able to go with a nice, simple, clear-cut identity option. 20% of the people out there, this is all the customers who have got legacy, complex infrastructure, complex requirements. That's the 20%. That's where probably we all live as identity practitioners. And that's probably where the interesting things are going to be happening. So once upon a time in the beginning, I made a bit of a mistake. Now, I had a bit of a misunderstanding about somebody. I was desperate for a job and they said, oh, that's right, I know somebody needs to write some directory synchronization tools. And I thought file systems, great. And that's when I learned all about LDAP and Exchange and all of these other things. And this is actually the system they were trying to build, which was a GalSync, which I think is where a lot of the early identity management got its roots from. You know, we were all there as a adjunct to email, which was the kingpin key, killer business app. And unfortunately for me, they were very desperate as well. And having caught the bug, I went from there, and I think to what we've all seen as a fairly classic identity solution. I've tried to keep this as vendor and platform neutral as possible. If I deviate into Microsoft speak, I'll apologize. That's just where I live and work at the moment. So identity provisioning, we have a source of truth, whether that's HR, SITS, whatever it happens to be, running through an IDM and goes into a user directory of some sort. First one I ever did, I think, was PeopleSoft through IDM into an Entrust directory and PKI. Fairly simple. And then naturally, as people caught on to how good these things were, it got a little bit more complex, and we have, again, this is very, very simplified, but we're looking at user directories, email, file stores, certificates, backend systems, and other resources. Then, of course, things got even more complicated and interesting where we got the cloud, and we started putting in synchronization tools after the fact that we've provisioned the user identity. Then we would move certain tools and resources into the cloud. So things like email was one of the early candidates. And I'm sure that anybody who worked on things like Live at Edu will have seen systems where we didn't actually bother with a HR or a SITS. We just took whatever was in the local identity store, usually an AD, ran that through an IDM and just turned that into email accounts in the cloud. And naturally things moved on and got more involved again, and we started dealing with authentication from the cloud and on-premise. And then we really got to where we are today with like increased integration again. And we've got today's situation where we'll take an on-premise HR, we'll run it through a chain of identity management, publish it to a directory, or run through a cloud sync into a cloud equivalent. That will then be used for user authentication onto all of the services that we're offering in the cloud. And there'll be some back-end processes, which I'm calling magic, or the service pixies, whatever we need to call it, which will actually do all the back-end provisioning. So we don't actually get the ability to create directly into the cloud. We just request that it happens. We set a license. We post something to a REST endpoint, and then magic happens on the back end. But it's no longer in our direct control. And more recently, I think this is probably where we're currently getting to. We're now getting HR as a SaaS, so we can now actually take the SaaS data, the HR data, straight out of there, publish that directly into the user directory using off-the-shelf tools. I don't know if anybody's actually looked at things like the Workday provisioning in Azure, or the SuccessFactors, but it's having played around with it, done this on a project now. It's a game changer. It's as close as I've ever seen to a turnkey solution. And this is brilliant because this is now provisioning identities for us directly into the user directory, looping them back through the magic when we request actually this person needs access to that HR system. So we'll then not only be creating their user account in the cloud, we're then actually enabling it to update the HR system on the back end. And that really moves us to where I think one of the two goals, or one of the many goals of a modern identity solution can be, where actually for a lot of organizations, a lot of businesses, do we still need on-prem? Now, speaking for ourselves as identity experts, we don't actually have an on-premise footprint. We don't need it. We've moved all of our tools, resources into the cloud, and we're quite comfortable with that. It works very well for us, and will work well for a lot of other organizations. However, what we do in terms of line of business is actually relatively straightforward. And as we all know, as identity practitioners, a modern, mature IT footprint is a bit more like this. It's tangled. It's there's nuances. There's interconnections, and there are a number of barriers to going cloud only. So looking at these, we've got things like legacy systems which can't be moved or aren't likely to be moved. Line of business applications which aren't modern. They're still on a terminal. They don't have a web front end we can expose through things like app proxies. We've got historic identity that we need to look after, so we don't reissue a username from 20 years ago. There may be legal issues or licensing terms. Certainly, when I've been dealing with people in things like energy production, there's all sorts of very, very strong legal constraints as to who can be responsible for the generation of energy and the sale of energy on the market. The penalty clauses in there are quite heroic. So we need to have incredibly strong separation of duty. That's a barrier to adoption in a single cloud. There might be compatibility issues, and I think there's this will factor of a lot of people are going to look at this, see this mountain of work they need to get through to get everything into the cloud, and just go, actually, it's just too hard. Now, that might be something that will change and erode over time, and hopefully it will, because there are all the benefits we can have in the cloud. It's more than just identity. We've got all the security. We've got things like the conditional access. There's all sorts in there that make this a very, very valuable tool, and something we should be encouraging people to take full advantage of. But I suspect, much as the cloud-only or cloud-first approach is attractive, we're going to end up with a bit of a hybrid. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist this image. So from that, what we might be looking at, and this is a washed down version of something we've recently built. We've got a HR system in the cloud. We're using off-the-shelf tools to publish data into the on-premise user directory. However, that's when the on-premise identity management solution kicks in and goes, I've got a brand new account that will need a unique identifier, that will need all the birthright access, that will need all the systems setting up on the back end for legacy line of business, which the cloud knows nothing about at the present time. And I will now push that back into the user directory where it can be picked up by the cloud synchronization tools and published into the cloud. And at that point, the magic can then happen and users can be given the appropriate licenses, which will give them all the back-end tools that they need: Office, email, SaaS apps, file store, Teams, the works. And I think this, in some degree, now bits of this might move around, but this is really, I think, where we're going to end up with a lot of those 20% customers for the foreseeable, certainly for the next few years, until we've got good strategies and good tooling and good approaches which let us move some things. So things like the unique identifier and historical naming, that one's eminently containerizable. We could potentially move that into an online function. And that means we can then start to erode that out of the on-premise IDM. And I think there's a number of discrete problems that we solve day in, day out will meet that. We just need to get the tooling and find the right levers to move. Now, from a Microsoft perspective, that's going to be things like Azure Functions, Power Apps, Flow, things like that, which will let us build processes and move that complexity into the cloud where it can be managed safely and repeatably. Other bits we may leave on premise. They may never shift while they're still doing legacy backend. So I think what we're really saying here is what we're going to be spending the next time over the next few years, where I think we're going to be putting the effort in, is finding the right place, the right piece of the puzzle to leverage. Where does a piece of functionality live? Does it live in the cloud? Does it live on premise? Does it live in a container? Is it something we can scale up? We can put into a unified cloud host and reuse multiple times? Is it going to be bespoke every single time? We're going to be finding and resolving all of these problems that we already had pretty much nailed down when we're in that nice, cozy on-premise cocoon. So I think that's probably where we've been, where we're at, where we're going in the immediate future. One thing just to try and this is really a little bit more speculative. What I was looking to do was perhaps do something a little bit more hypothetical and look over the horizon. And the thing that I really thought might be a good thing to start thinking about now before it hits us, because I think this is going to be one of the things I know a lot of the big identity providers are looking at this, and that's going to be sovereign self-identification. So when effectively bring your own identity. We all know the fun and games that bring your own device caused. So I think when somebody starts saying, actually, because of GDPR and all these other privacy regulations, which are now increasingly popping up around the world, I'm only going to share those bits of my identity that I want you to have. And I would like to use my own identity, which I will then reuse on the identity that I authenticate to, that happens to be my personal account. And I happen to log into my personal email with, and my Amazon and my other resources, and I book my holidays with. I can also use to identify myself when I'm going to work in the morning. And I think that's going to be one of those cultural shifts, if it lands, where it's going to shake up even more all we've already seen. And we're actually going to end up with those puzzle pieces scattered further and further afield. So it may be that we are identifying somebody and then we are contributing elements of their identity at the workplace. And when that person undertakes a B2B transaction with a partner organization, that we are providing some of that over the wire and some of that from their core identity. And that's then allows them to successfully show who they are and who they are claiming to be and who they are capable of, what roles they're capable of fulfilling. So I think that's going to be one of those things, like I say, that's not here yet. I don't think it's going to be here for the next couple of years, but I've got a sneaking suspicion that one's going to come over the hill at some point and make things very, very interesting for us all. So from there, any questions, comments?
So Jason, we've got one question for you.
Oh, good.
How have you seen businesses handling their identity access management in the current pandemic?
I think there's a renewed focus on it. I think fortunately a lot of organizations have these things in place. So they've been able to just actually, they've been scaling up and scaling out. So I think there's a few organizations I've been working with where they've had a mass panic and all of a sudden all of their workforce is learning Teams. And I think where we are seeing some challenges and where I think a lot of people are going to see challenges are where people actually have access to resources, but because they're not remote workers naturally, they don't know that they're there, so they're resolving the problems. So one of the things I've seen for that, for example, is my wife is a primary school teacher, and so she's got access to the full office suite at home, showed up one morning saying, "Oh, what's this Zoom thing I've got to start using?" I'm saying, "Well, where's that come from? You've got all these other things you've already paid for, you can already authenticate to, you already know and understand." So I think we're going to see a lot of people are going to find that their shadow IT has exploded as people are unaware of what's necessarily at their fingertips and will be attempting to resolve the problem with the best of intentions, but no doubt causing absolute carnage in the wake.
Yeah, I think we can definitely expect some carnage once this is quietened down.
As long as it's IT carnage, I'm completely comfortable with that.
You got it sorted. Unfortunately, our second guest hasn't been able to join us. So this was a first go round, so I did expect a few bumps in the road. So for now, we're gonna, unless there's any other questions for Jason or about Identity Global, I think we'll probably wrap it up as a quick introduction to how we're going to do this. The next call will be on the 21st. Oh, there's another question. That's good. Here we go, Jason. There's another question for you. How cost effective do you think cloud IAM will be? Opposed to on-prem?
I think that's going to be one of those challenging decisions everybody's going to have to make. And I think it's, if there was a one size fits all with identity, if all of our solutions and requirements were nice and straightforward and identical, then we wouldn't be here. So I think for a lot of organizations, it's going to be very, very cost effective. For us, it makes no sense to have an on-prem footprint. And I think for a lot of organizations, it won't make any sense to have an on-prem footprint. You won't need the licenses, you won't need the CALs, you're just paying for your cloud on an annual subscription, and it's nice and straightforward. You're not maintaining anything. You don't need to maintain people like ourselves. Not that we're expensive, we're exceptionally good value for money. And I mean that across the entire industry, not as a plug. But if you don't need us around because you can just set it up in the cloud and it's turnkey, brilliant. I think that for me is the win for a lot of businesses, particularly in that 80% bracket. They can set all of this up. They need potentially a little bit of help, but then it will just look after itself. Their needs are simple and straightforward enough. You don't need an expert building a complex solution.
Great, thank you. Now another question just come in from Carol, which isn't for you, Jason, it's more for me, just about the interactivity of future calls. We will most likely, now that the first one's out of the way, move to more of an interactive one so that you guys can chat and jump in at any point, so you don't have to listen to me asking the questions. So just because I was halfway through typing that answer, so I will just tell you that now, Carol, and everyone else. Yeah, the next one will be more interactive. And then Jason, another question's coming for you. Gonna keep you here until they're answered.
Well, it's not like I'm going very far today.
No. Do you think self-sovereign systems come up against similar commercial issues to those faced by federated identity, but this time from a pay-for-use basis?
Yes, I think it's going to be very, very interesting, because it used to be federated identity was something that was done, you know, we would stand that up on a business level. The fact that somebody's now saying, here I am, use my keys or certificates or my blockchain, I think it's going to be, I don't think it's going to be free. I don't think it's going to be, there is going to be a cost somewhere along that chain. But I think that potentially the benefits to business are going to be that actually the provisioning and deprovisioning goes away. What we're then looking at is actually access management and authentication. So being able to say to somebody, actually, well, yes, we know who you are. You've provided your identity to us. We're now going to trust you to do this, 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 and this. And if you're accessing this particular system over here, we want to apply conditional policies over the top. But this then becomes tools that we already have out of the box. So I think there's going to be some fundamental rethinks on some things, but other things from a business perspective, I think the draw is going to be there just the same as it is with bring your own device, that actually there's a cost benefit there. There's a management overhead to some degree, but we lose, it becomes that trade-off.
Great, I think good detailed answer there. Just waiting to see if there's any more questions. If there are, type away. If not, we will wrap this one up for now. But as Dave mentioned earlier on, after this call, you'll all receive an email with the recording, plus a form. Firstly, if anyone wants to take up a speaking slot, then please, by all means, get involved, and we'll make sure that everyone gets a turn. And like I said before, it will be more of an interactive one. Oh, Jason, another one, which is what we love. Do you think users should be trusted with their own identities? I
personally find it very challenging, because I have no users, and 90% of the problems I ever encounter professionally are user related. But at the same time, I think that, again, there's going to be a push for this at some point. Or there's potentially this push if this movement takes off, and it might be like one of those other, these millions of other identity white elephants that are there but never land. We may never see it. But I think if it does land, it'll land in a big way.
So,
but I think if the systems are there, then yes, we can trust to a degree, and I think that's where all those conditional policies will be used to protect the real sensitive data and systems.
Yeah. That what you said about the users, it's a point of much controversy. I know about, are people the weak link in the chain? So we might as well ask that as well while we're here. Do you think that they are the weak link in the chain, or do you think that there are other mitigating factors that should be thought about?
I think they are a link in the chain. Now, if you have done everything else properly, so you put all of your firewalls, you put all your protections, you put all of your system layers in place which will protect and partition data and systems, then they are probably the last remaining chink in the armor to go for. And certainly, back in the dark ages when I used to do more hands-on security work, where I have got into systems that I've been paid to access without permission, if you follow, I've had more success going to the people than anything else. But again, today, conditional access, multi-factor authentication, these are the additional buttresses we can put up against people, because we all are potentially vulnerable. I'm quite happy to put my hand up and say we ran a internal phishing test late last year, and I got picked up on that one because I clicked on a link that I really shouldn't have. And fortunately, that was an in-house test.
Yeah, I remember that well.
Right, because we can, we all have that. Oh yeah, that looks plausible. I'll click the link. We are all vulnerable, no matter how knowledgeable and experienced we might be. So yes, but we can protect against ourselves. Defense in depth works very, very well for a reason.
Great. We've got another question/comment as well. Don't you think that enterprises might be able to leverage SSI to profit, maybe like credit card companies that hold a lot of data about user identities linking to other businesses and charging other business per transaction, so to speak, to verify user identity?
That might be one of the things that arises, and I wouldn't put it past the banks and the credit card companies setting up shop to say, actually, we will provide that authentication and validation that person, that identity is who they claim to be. So the only similar scheme that I've seen realistically, I mean, I know there's the sovereign self-identity team are working very hard in this space, but the only other thing which I've seen which is probably comparable would be things like the Estonian e-passport, where the Estonian government is underwriting the identity. Now, I wouldn't be surprised to find that the banks were offering something similar to say, well, actually, we know who you are, we know where you live, we've already checked your details. For a small fee, we will provide you your annual identity hosting.
Great. If there's no more questions or comments or discussion, I know I keep saying that, but we just one more will usually pop up just as I'm about to say no. Okay, we're good. Okay, so yeah, feedback taken on board, guys. I think next time we'll definitely do it in a different format so that we can hear your voices and you can chat to each other while the speaker talks. So spread the word. It's gonna be a slightly different format next time. Again, email at the end after this call. We'll give you the link to sign up for the next one, a link to a form to say if you want to speak and just give us a little information about what you want to speak about, just to make sure that there's no conflict with any other speakers. Because if you all want to say the same thing, obviously, you might as well bring you into a panel or something. So yeah, we want you guys.
Although again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So if we do get a lot of speakers on the same topic, we might be suggesting that.
Absolutely. I've actually written down while we go. I think we should have a panel discussion and someone else to ask the questions who doesn't work in marketing. So yeah, thank you so much for everyone who's come onto the call today. I hope to see you guys like in the LinkedIn group and signing up for the next one and on the next call. And I think we'll all put our videos on so that we don't have to feel so isolated during this pandemic, and talk about some identity. And thank you again, Jason, for your talk. And hopefully we will be able to bump Ahmed's talk to another call. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
So thank you very much, everybody. Any questions? And yeah, if you want to get involved in any way, you can email me josephs@identityexperts.co.uk. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.